This is Zero Signal, where security leaders stop waiting for certainty and start leading through it. I'm Conor Sherman.
And I'm Stuart Mitchell.
Let's get into it. Zero Signal is brought to you by Sysdig. Threat actors are compromising cloud accounts in under 8 minutes. Vulnerabilities are being exploited within 10 hours of disclosure. That's the defender's window, and it keeps closing. Attackers aren't waiting on dashboards. They go straight for what's running. Real time is the only timeline that matters. And that's why Forrester named Sysdig a leader in its latest wave for the cloud-native application protection platforms. Runtime is where real risk shows up, and runtime is what Sysdig is built for. So stop watching and start defending. Learn more at sysdig.com and check out the link in the description. Zero Signal is brought to you by RiskPoint. When the mission is on the line, you don't want a vendor. You want to work with people who've actually been there. I've worked with RiskPoint directly. Together, we took an organization from zero to FedRAMP moderate across a real cloud footprint, and a business unit from zero to CMMC, and we did it all under 9 months. That happened because this team had done it before and moved at the speed the work demanded. Trust, experience, and pace, right when I needed all three. They call it security and compliance made human. Practitioners, not salespeople. In it with you for the long haul, from readiness all the way to authorization. FedRAMP, CMMC, SOC 2, and cloud. Where you go for advice matters. And if you're staring down an audit or an authorization, go to riskpoint.com. That's riskpoint.com. Check out the link in the description. Welcome back to Zero Signal. So today we're sitting down with Chris Hughes. Chris is the founder of Resilient Cyber, read by tens of thousands of security professionals every week. He's a 3-time author and a cyber innovation fellow at CISA. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the pod today.
I'm excited to be here. I followed you guys for a long time, so excited to chat.
Chris, and what's it like to be on the other side? Normally you sit in this seat.
Yeah, this is the harder job. Usually just get to ask questions and see what people say and, be interested in what they have to say. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited.
Cool. Well, I'm excited that you're a seat because I've been following your work. I've been listening to your content and reading your newsletter for a very long time. You've been putting this out for years. And one of the things that you've been really focused on, I think you're almost prescient in your focus on this, was vulnerabilities. Like looking at what now everyone calls it the vulnerability apocalypse or the full apocalypse. Right. 3 years ago, you were talking about this. 4 years ago, you were talking about how we needed to focus on exploitability and reachability and how it was getting out of hand not out of hand, like the discovery of vulnerabilities versus our ability to consume this information and take action on it, which led to the production, or you writing and publishing some of the books that you've written now. So I want to get your reaction to a particular stat, and then we can dive into, in this world of AI finding all the vulns, like what do we do about it? But we've got 66,000 CVEs proposed to be discovered. That's what we're forecasting in 2026 are going to be uncovered. That's 46% above what we had last year, and we didn't exactly do a great job last year. So what can we structurally start doing different? So I'd love to get your take on where we stand in the world of vulnerability discovery and remediation.
Yeah, it's a big question with a lot of technical and non-technical aspects to it. I had Jerry Gamblin on my show. As you know, I host the show too, and he helped write that projection for FIRST, the organization that does CVEs and all those kind of things, CNAs, et cetera. Yep. And in that piece, yes, we're projected to have 66 or even 100,000 CVEs this year, he says, but they call it a rain, not a flood. And it's what he's saying is there's nuance. Essentially, exploitation is still flat. 1% to 2% of CVEs are actually being exploited, despite that massive surge of CVEs that we're having. So what we're seeing is we've already historically sucked at this. Vulnerability backlogs were already massive before AI, hundreds of thousands or millions in large enterprise organizations. And we've been talking about EPSS and KEV and reachability and all these kind of things, runtime, et cetera. And now we're having years and or decades of security technical debt being found by AI, after all of us saying, hey, we should fix this. Hey, we should prioritize and not this sprint, and it gets pushed to the backlog. But I do think what's going to happen is and it's scary is because we are going to see autonomous exploitation. That's kind of the second thing that's going to come, I think, as agents and AI improves of not just finding, but now exploiting things. That's when it's going to get bad. And there's a lot of things there. Like it's technical. Like how can we fix this in terms of our organizations? How can we use technology for reachability, prioritization, business context of criticality and asset criticality, data sensitivity, internet reachability, all these kind of things. But it's also like the people process, like the people process technology paradigm, like that people process piece, the workforce, competing incentives or priorities internally to the organization. The fact that there's no such concept as like software liability, so people can keep shipping products, and like the onus and burden is on the community to patch, fix, mitigate, etc. So there's no easy answer. And that's like, I've been reading, I'm involved with the Cloud Security Alliance and other organizations, and they've been putting out, like they had a series of summits with CISOs, hundreds of CISOs in New York and San Francisco, and I think in London, maybe, I think was the third one, I can't remember. But the guidance there, like I'm reading through it looking for like I didn't think of that. And it's like, it's all the stuff that we should have been doing.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point. It's like doing the things that we know we needed to be doing. And I talk about this sometimes too. It's like security programs or people in the security industry are really good at first principles thinking, and we know how to solve problems. What we have missed is the business case to make the investment to go do the thing. If nothing else, what 2026 gave us was the business case to go do the thing.
Yeah, I think I had a venture capitalist on the show recently, and of course, like, they're incentivized to kind of look at this enticingly. And they say this is the best time to be in cybersecurity because, and this was kind of present at, I hosted the Innovator and Investor Summit yesterday as an MC for Black Hat. And like this was kind of throughout the room is like everyone's excited because now cybersecurity is not just a topic in our bubble, in our little world. It feels big sometimes in our space, a lot of people, companies, but it's like a societal conversation now. Like all of our critical infrastructure, water, contamination conversations, and like schools and all these kind of things, underserved communities, all these kind of things are going to be impacted potentially by cybersecurity and AI now. So maybe that can serve as a forcing function, right, to make that business case of, okay, we have to actually address this stuff now. It's going to have societal implications.
But that's also going to take an upskilling of security leaders,
yes.
right? I think sometimes, like, again, to your point, I think we feel really comfortable in our own communities and our own circles, and we feel really important and powerful as we come and do talks to other security professionals. That's not how the rest of the world has historically viewed security, whether we like it or not. But I think if we're going to come and play these serious roles, like there are a lot of CISOs who have been asking for this, but it is a be careful what you wish for, because it is a new layer of responsibility, not to the fact that there's not enough on it anyway, but if you don't have that skill set to mirror everything back to the business and drive innovation whilst keeping risk in check, like it's a different skill set. Like what are you seeing in this space of CISOs kind of stepping up or not?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I wrote a piece, I don't know, it's been like over a year now, called the cybersecurity delusion problem. And it's like, we think cybersecurity is the most critical risk to the world and to the business. And then like, I've been a CEO now, and you realize like payroll and HR and like contracts and revenue and like, oh, there's all these other things that are like, if they don't exist, like cybersecurity doesn't matter anymore to the business because those things are more critical. So I think that that's something like cybersecurity practitioners need to realize. It's like, yes, all this is important, the cybersecurity risks and so on, but the business has other priorities and incentives and things that must happen that are more critical than cyber risk in some cases. So I think recognizing that and like tying to your point of like, how do we enable the business? I feel like we've said cybersecurity is a business enabler. Like we have these phrases we say that feel good to say, but we haven't really operated that way. If you look at like what we've done with vulnerability management, like shift security left and all these kind of things, and that we say, all we did was just throw massive spreadsheets at people with like no context and like fix all the things or you can't go to production, and like they have to get a product out. They're competing in a category or a market, and they have, customers to serve. And like, we didn't think of any of that. It was just like, oh, well, we found these things. Like you have to fix all of them, or you have to fix the highs and criticals. And like, what does that even mean? What's it based on? And it was based on like generic criteria that had no relationship to the business or their environment or their architecture. So we've done a poor job in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Shift left could also be rephrased as shift left. And it's just like, I look at this and I'm like, you see this, a lot of people, and they just do not validate what they're sending back. They just basically say, oh, I can't handle it, so you're going to handle it for me, and that's just not actually helpful. That's just not good security architecture.
Yeah, no, I had an image in that article, I think, where someone's like throwing piles over a fence, like, yes. And it's like, well, it's someone else's problem. Like, they don't have to deal with the workload or the burden or the toil, so they don't care, Yeah,
my dashboard's clean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we told them all about the issues. Yeah, so it's just, and then it's funny because it created tension and animosity between us and our peers, developers, engineers in the business. Yeah. They don't want to work with us. They don't want to collaborate with us. And like, it's funny because that stuff actually creates shadow usage and governance gaps because they avoid us. They work around us. They don't want to engage us. Yeah. So we've been like our own worst enemy in a lot of ways like that.
And that happens in every business, right? Like if you are not front and center championing a security culture and saying, hey, like, I know you're going to do this. It's like telling your kids are going to drink when they turn in their teenagers. Hey, drink downstairs in the basement. This is what you should drink. Don't drink vodka. Like, it's the same thing. Hey, I know you're going to use ChatGPT, Claude. Do it this way. Let's talk about it and have that conversation, because otherwise, to your point, they're going to go around you and they're going to do it the wrong way with the wrong people.
Yeah. I got 5 kids, and it's like I'd rather them have an open conversation with me, like, "Hey, Dad, I'm thinking about XYZ," than like me finding like, "Oh, I wish they would just talk to me," you know. And I think like security being like an honest partner and like collaborator with them, they'll be willing to pull us in and like work with us and say, "Hey, here we have to do this. Like, what's our best way to do it securely?" Rather than working around us or avoiding us. And it's like, we have to change how we act to get that to happen.
And then it's like calling from jail, like, Dad? Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yes.
It's the exact same
Yeah, let's
thing.
avoid the calling the CISA from jail.
Exactly that.
Exactly, that's true. I want to go back to this thing you mentioned at the top of the show with like the exploitability piece of it. Is that still where you would say security leaders need to be focused on? Like, if the volume of vulns that are being discovered in our software is increasing, how do we get our handles around this problem? Is this really just you must be able to demonstrate exploitability, and that's the few things that matter, so that's actually our vuln program should focus there? Is there more, maybe a sophisticated way of thinking about this? Because no matter, every security leader is looking at 2 things: a backlog they can't handle, and 2, a growing liability that they need to be able to explain. And that can be board, peers, regulators, whomever. You're gonna have to explain the decision of what you did and didn't do. So I'm just kind of curious if you had any more thoughts around that.
No,
area.
I think it's a good question, and like there are no silver bullets in cybersecurity. So it's not. And despite what the vendor floor may say in the booths and so on, like and like yes, reachability or exploitability, like these things matter, like the KEV and EPSS, or even there's commercial vulnerability feeds that are even better than those that have more tracking of known exploitation and things like that, or runtime reachability, and like coupling that with static reachability, and like all these kind of technical measures. But I think you said something there that's worth pointing out, is like you go to discuss with the board or executive leadership and so on. Like, we want them to address risk, but they never have necessarily communicated or articulated what their risk tolerance is either. We're just kind of making assumptions that like there should be no risks, or and if it's weird. There's always this weird dynamic in my experience, like in different roles, CISO and everything underneath, where like they won't fix the things and they won't prioritize them, but they also won't explicitly accept the risk. Like they just kind of implicitly do through behaviors and norms and stuff. So I think if the business was willing to, we will or won't tolerate this kind of slowdown or this kind of friction in our processes or our initiatives and our objectives and so on. That would help. But, on the technical side, like, yes, it's absolutely known exploitation, exploitability, reachability, both in static and runtime context, the criticality of the asset, internet exposure, data sensitivity. And as you can see, like, it's like, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of things to consider for every single asset, for every system, for every vulnerability. So it's hard. It's really, really hard. And, I feel like AI has made vuln management, cool again, because there was a period there like, oh, it's, that old crusty thing in a spreadsheet that like no one cared about. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, like we have to fix these things, or someone or something is going to find them.
And there's a bit of an arms race, right, between like automated exploitation versus automated patch management. And I don't think we've nailed either yet, but like one will happen first.
Yes, and that's what you said there is so important too, because like I've been making the case that like every technological wave in my career, at least, like cloud, mobile, SaaS, and now AI and things like that, like security is always a laggard. We're risk adverse. We worry about what can go wrong. What if something gets compromised or breached or exploited? Where the business, the developers, engineers, and even our adversaries, like they've already moved out. They're early adopters or innovators with this technology. Like security needs to do the same. And like what he just said of like, how can we automate patching? How can we automate remediation? That would have a massive impact. But like, it's difficult too, because what if we impact the business like the CIA triad? What if we impact the A of availability? They definitely will not be happy with us then. So I think we're like kind of tiptoeing of like auto remediation and things like that, but it's not fully figured out yet. And I think if we can make some progress there, that would really help balance the scale a lot.
We had a super sharp guest, probably 6 months ago, Saad Ullah, who was he's an MIT student, PhD, and some of the work he was doing in that space. And it was interesting from someone, we assume this is going to be a great mind from security, maybe, who figures this out. And some of the work that he was doing, he oversimplified everything in such a way where you were sat there like, Maybe you're right. Like, it was so fascinating.
Yeah, well, Assad highlighted. So what happens? We got him on the show last year because he and his team took second place on the AI CC exploitation. So
From DARPA.
from DARPA,
Yes.
they
Yeah.
came in and like they did the whole cyber exploitation piece, and it was really cool. I was like, so there was them, those Trilobits, and then there's the team out of Atlanta. They were the top three. So we got him on the show to talk about like what he built and how he built. And here's someone who comes in with like no cybersecurity experience. He's just like, okay, what is a vulnerability, and like what's first principles thinking, and then how do you do the exploitation? And part of what they did last year is they had to also create a harness where you would create the patch as well. And what he drew my attention to, and then was just confirmed with research that's come out from 1Password, is that not all patches are equal. And I know it sounds dumb, but when you're asking an AI, but it's so powerful. Like when you ask an AI system, go patch something, it's how you measure it matters so much. So a lot of these patches that are coming out from these agentic vulnerability remediation systems are brittle. And so the research, so he came out and he kind of brought my attention to this idea that like, sure, you can write a patch, but did you actually fix the root cause or did you fix the symptom? Did you actually just move the files into different locations so now your scanner technology can't find the vuln? And these are real problems that the agentic remediation systems have. And then, so independent of that conversation, fast forward 6 months, then we've got the 1Password team coming out with Keith Hoodlet, who's also a friend and guest of the pod. His research team is publishing artifacts, and basically it boils down to, of the 4 criteria of types of patches that you can do, one was like, did you fix the thing properly? Did you fix the thing in a brittle way that someone could bypass? Did you fix the thing, but then change the application behavior? To your point, availability, it's not, the application is not functioning properly. Or did you introduce new vulnerabilities? That's another problem we have with agentic systems. Of those first 2, only 43% of the patches would cover the first 2, and only 17% of the patches were real resilient patches. So it's just kind of a grounding moment of like where we are in this journey. Like we're early in this autonomous remediation space.
Yeah, you said a few things there I think I wanted to highlight. One is like the individual who came from a non-cyber background. Like I think we've experienced this where we pull, you probably have seen this as a CISA, where you pull people from development into security and like they're incredible because like they're viewing it from the other persona. But I've experienced that now, not with just developers, but people from non-cyber or even IT backgrounds, because they look at things differently than we're kind of stuck in the way of how we always do it or how we always think about things. So I think that some of these problems may be solved from people without a background in our field that just think of things differently than we do, and we should welcome that. And then the other piece of what you just said there is really important too, because if you're not addressing the root cause, like you said, I spent some time as a cyber innovation fellow at CISA. That was something that Bob Lord at the time, who was there, had come from Yahoo and so on. I think he would be speaking about that. Like, are we really addressing like the CWE, like underneath this, or are we just patching the same problems over and over? And never because we're like a hamster on a wheel otherwise. Like we're just fixing the same things and never fixing the root cause analysis of, the issues there. So I think that's something we should be thinking about as well, and integrating that with like product development teams, engineering teams, et cetera. Like how do we not just fix this, but fix it so this stops happening again? Otherwise, we'll just keep doing the same kind of work and we never improve things.
Well, all I gotta say is thank God somebody wrote 3 books on this topic to go solve the problem.
So if we think about vulnerability management, it's hot again, but the attack surface has changed massively, right? Like, how do you think in an AI era the attack surface is compared to what it was, say, 10 years ago when...
It's insane. I've been trying to write about this in articles. I called one like the attack surface exponential is what I talked about. And this is just like using GitHub as an example. Everyone knows GitHub. There's other source code management systems and things like that, different platforms, even new ones coming out. I think GitHub's former CEO is making one now. But GitHub had like a press release at the end of 2025 because they hit 1 billion commits for the year. And it was like celebratory PR. In like March, just a few months later, the COO took to X and said, like, we're on track to have 14 billion commits this year. So they went from 1 billion to 14 billion in 1 year. And it's driven largely by like agentic software development, AI coding tools, and so on. So the attack surface exponential, just in that way, is huge. And then you look at there's tons of research by AppSec vendors and so on, and even academia, Carnegie Mellon and others who are looking at the code quality from a security perspective that's being put out by these tools. And a lot of times they may functionally pass the test, but they fail on security. And it's due to a whole kinds of reasons, the prompts that the people are using. Are they using security-oriented prompts or not? Also, the fact that people aren't validating the work, it goes back to incentives and behaviors. Developers are driven by feature releases and velocity and how much they get done in a sprint. They're not prioritized. They don't go up for their annual review and say, how many security bugs did you fix? No one.
Also, people that are not developers are pushing code.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So you have a massive.
and I've seen it, and I've not pushed anything, but I've written stuff and watched it, and I'm like, I have no idea what is going
Yeah.
on, and that is happening a lot.
We've said, like, there's phrases like we democratized development, which is amazing, but we never democratized security along with that.
Yeah,
And
nice.
like also these models that drive these coding tools are trained on open source, which inherently has its own massive amounts
Bias,
of
yeah.
like there's I forget the exact figures, but like overwhelmingly has vulnerabilities and flaws in the open source code as well. So it's just kind of regurgitating those as it writes new code.
Interesting fact on that. It's like, so about a year ago, the research was that when you asked an LLM at that time, so the laws changed, but I asked to generate code, 40 to 60% of the code it was generating had easy to identify but structural vulnerabilities. And it's interesting because it mapped the open source community. If open source code was also vulnerable about 40 to 60% of the time of the code, and you're like, if you train it on the corpus of vulnerable data to say this is how you write code, not surprisingly, it's going to generate this vulnerable code.
Yeah.
So things are improved slightly with harnesses and all these kind of things and retraining and such, but the core principle's still there.
Yeah, there's an interesting conversation. I've seen some people say, like, should we have purpose-built models that are trained on only high-quality code? And like, maybe that's the case, but like the things that make the models so useful is they are general purpose and they have such vast amounts of data they've been trained on and so on. So like, I don't know if we'll see the community move, in terms of just using purpose-built models for that.
And then it's also like, what is the unit cost of that going to be versus a generic LLM? Like, we're already at a struggling point from a, token maxing or whatever. Like, I don't think we're there anymore. But I think like if we're adding layers, that's more compute power, that's more cost. Like, I think there's certain situations where that should be the case, but I also think like if there's low risk situations, you can just use a generic LLM.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people iterating on this. Like big vendors have come out with different, open source models and like things that are pre-built for this. There's a lot of people in the AppSec community that are injecting, talk about shift left, like truly shifting left into the agentic coding tools and trying to catch things before they ever get committed. Like there's all kinds of, and these are all positive things, but again, it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be all the things that help.
No, I'm with you there. And you're right. I think I was reading your post on this. You drew my attention, like Cisco and a handful of other vendors have put out these smaller specialized models that's just on detecting vulnerabilities in code. And I think there's going to be a place for these small language models and being able to focus on these purpose tasks. Will it replace large language models? No, we're definitely going to have these 3 trillion parameter models out there. I think we might, maybe Conor, it's such in the future, like, do we get a world where it's like your front door is a large language model and then it realizes the problem it needs to solve and then activates the smaller language models? I could see a world where that may kind of make sense.
That's already happening.
Yeah,
like if you watch the conversation, like I try to watch like the AI macro super cycle or whatever you want to call it, the Beyond Cyber. And like there's conversations around
this world besides cyber.
Yeah, exactly. There's conversations around like not just open source models and how good they are getting and things, but like, fusion models that have like multiple mixture of expert situations where like an open source model for this, a closed source model for that, and routes based on the task. And like, and now you're seeing Open Router and others kind of like, route to the right model for the right task. And like, is that going to be the way? I don't know, but I think it's interesting and it shows some benefits for sure.
That's what Sean Cutler is building, I believe, a decision-based. It's based on what you're trying to do, it makes the right like LLM selection.
Yeah, and that's a security thing as well as like an economic one. If you don't want to use like this expensive closed model for everything, how can we route to cheaper, more efficient options and so on?
Well, it's always been true that the greatest influence of your cybersecurity strategy is going to be your CFO, your general counsel. Like they're really it. So like we're in a moment, it's like, well, great, we're going to token all the things, and your CFO is like, hang tight for a second. That's going to change. So we're going to see this. So I think that will be one of the reasons that we see this adoption of open weight models. It's not because we somehow got to like this technical consensus of this, that, and the other. We're going to be like, all of our CFOs are going to be like, all right, this AI thing, it needs to get a lot cheaper, a lot faster. Like, how do we do this?
Yeah, I definitely think that's going to be like the limitations. Like token maxing was hot briefly because everyone's like, wait, like this is
got a bill.
This is not sustainable. Like, and it's like funny because like we live in society and like before AI and all these things, like there's always been a right tool for the right job. Where did that go? Like, why did we just start using one tool for all jobs? And it feels like we kind of came back down to earth really quickly with that.
Because our entire American economy is just one big bet on frontier models.
Yes.
That's what happened.
I predict that probably that next year at Black Hat, it's going to be around value-based AI, right? I actually think like right now we're seeing what is the best outcomes and situations. At some point, unit economics are going to be a play, and I don't think the cost, I think a lot of people do predict that the cost of AI usage is going to go down. This is America. I just don't see it. Once you set a price, it rarely comes down. Netflix could be cheaper. It's not. It goes up every few years. So I think like we'll be talking about unit economics in a serious way where we're looking at that. Like we can't just have the best of everything because all of a sudden your AI bill is absurd, your security bill is absurd, and to your point earlier in the conversation, this is about the business making money, not the most secure solution.
Yeah.
It's the Jarvin's paradox. Like the cost per token is going to come down 10% while the usage goes up 10x.
Yes.
It's like, oh, it came down slightly, so therefore we can use a lot more of it.
Yeah. No, I think you guys are both spot on. And it's like, you hear this language now around value and outcome and things like that. But, consumption-based pricing is good for the labs. They have a massive amount of investment that they need to, return on to the investors and like so on. But yeah, I think it's all going to have to come back to business principles, basically, for the broader society and ecosystem using these things.
Zero Signal is brought to you by Hampton North. I've been responsible for building and turning around cybersecurity programs for companies where a lapse in security just isn't an option. Finance, high tech, AI. Different domains, but the same truth. The programs live and die on talent. And no strategy ships without the right people who share the right DNA. That's why I partner with Hampton North. I've built 3 cybersecurity teams with them, and every time they move faster than anyone else without sacrificing quality. While other agencies are still pushing paperwork, Hampton North already had vetted candidates in front of me. Their executive search is not one size fits all. With one of the largest networks of security leaders in the US, their leadership roles hit the market in days, sometimes hours. And their go-to-market practice covers CROs, CMOs, revenue leaders, and full team build-outs for scaling cybersecurity businesses. They meet every candidate, they reference every story. If you're ready to build and scale and grow your security program, go to hamptonnorth.com and see why brands like Clear, Instacart, Airtable, and OpenAI trust Hampton North to build great teams. Check out the link in the description.
I want to move us over towards these AI systems themselves inside the enterprise, right? Because like moving beyond just like the models, but how they're getting applied to the enterprise and how we start securing them. So when I walk the floor, when I talk to other CISOs, this seems to be where we're naturally gravitating, moving the story to. It's like, how do we now start to take, as we start to migrate critical processes inside our business from deterministic to non-deterministic systems and move these agentic systems, can you give us some of like your thoughts based on the research that you're seeing of like, what are some of the frameworks or principles that security leaders could lean on to start securing these agentic workflows? Because it is wild when you start to think about like, you have these component pieces, each step along the way is non-deterministic, and you're trying to keep bounding and shaping this thing that, as we saw with maybe the Hugging Face incident, if they want to, they can hop the fence and just cause a lot of damage. So I'm kind of curious, like, what would be your take or counsel to security leaders who are trying to accelerate this agentic transformation inside the company?
Yeah, I've been heavily focused on this for like the past year or so, and like in the community with like Cloud Security Alliance and OWASP and Coalition for Secure AI and all these industry groups. We have so many of them now; it's crazy.
Yes.
But there's
they
a
all
lot.
have their own acronyms.
Yes, and they all have their own acronyms and vernacular and so on. But there's a lot to unpack on what you just said. Is like just yesterday, like I have friends who help write the OWASP LLM Top 10, for example, right? They released a new version of it, and like the opening line is like it's basically I don't want to misquote it, but it's essentially saying the system around the model, aka the harness, is more critical than the model. And we spent like the first wave of AI security focus on securing chatbots. Like maybe it hallucinates, maybe it says something embarrassing, maybe it hurts our reputation. Okay, like that, those are risks, but that changes entirely when you have autonomy, tool use, the ability to take action in the enterprise. These things, and like you point out, OpenAI and Hugging Face. Interestingly enough, like that's only the first of 3. Yesterday, I don't know if you saw this, UK's AI Security Institute came out and said, oh, actually our models during evaluation, they were evaluating Mythos and GPT 5.6, I think it is. And they did like 100 and some, evaluations for cybersecurity purposes. And during that testing, of course, like they had it access, they intentionally gave it access to the internet. It went out, it actually socially engineered open source maintainers. It created malicious packages. It like bypassed CAPTCHAs. It did all kinds of crazy stuff. It like violated GitHub's terms of use and service. And then of course, the week before that, Anthropic, came out shortly after OpenAI, like, oh yeah, like our model also like did all these crazy things. It did 3 times, not just once. And of course there's like, marketing and competitive dynamics playing it there, but it's the reality that these systems can take action. This is different than deterministic software that, we knew exactly how it would behave and we knew exactly what it would do.
No, I was gonna say, like, it is interesting that you have these 3 incidents like back to back to back. It's almost as if this stuff was happening. They weren't going to tell us about it. Then the incident with Hugging Face was so public that it was like, oh yeah, me too, me too.
It's kind of popular as well. Like it went down decent. Like it didn't.
Hugging Face team handled it like a champ though. The Hugging Face team did.
I was on again, like a Cloud Security Alliance call with Hugging Face and had over like 500 CISOs and security leaders. The Hugging Face team joined it, and they were very transparent about what happened, how it unfolded. There's so much interesting stuff there of like basically how they observed it, how it was behaving like irrationally compared to like human and malicious actor, how they had to fall back to an open source model rather than a closed model due to refusals. There's just so much to unpack in that aspect of it. But again, it's like, you're giving these systems autonomy, the ability to take action, use tools. I think we're going to have an open like policy conversation of like, this is having real world impact on individuals and organizations. Like you should have some responsibility for like carrying out these evaluations. Like you can't just say, oh, well, it's just a test. So like we can't be held accountable for whatever it did like that. It's impacting real people and things. So there's that. But in the enterprise context, it's like the age old, security paradigm. Like we always think about critical security controls. Like you can't secure what you can't see is like a catchphrase we say. And like if you look at the top two, it's hardware, software, asset inventory. Most organizations have really poor understanding of where agents are running in the enterprise, on the endpoint, in the cloud, in the SaaS environment, custom homegrown agents, all these kind of different permutations of where agents are starting to be used and embedded. They don't know where they're running, let alone what they have access to and what they can do. And it's like a whole slew. There's the agentic AI top 10. You asked what security leaders can use. That's a great framework in terms of thinking about like what are another OWASP one. Like they've been great about getting out ahead of this. And what's been interesting is like they have a couple iterations of these documents. The first ones were just kind of built on the vibes or practitioners' inputs and so on. Like what people think could happen. And what's crazy is like it's quickly went to like they just put out the state of agentic AI security and governance report, right? It's shifted from what could happen to what is happening. Thousands of different incidents and scenarios at this point of what is happening.
Do you know what's so fascinating? I feel like this year there is a little bit more. What is happening is really challenging. I will say that. Like it's really hard for security leaders, but there's some comfort in knowing. Like we're kind of away from what might happen. I know that there's still crazy things that might happen, but I think now that security leaders know that like, yes, stuff is pretty insane, but like at least I know what's going on. So now I can start preventing and responding. I think there is so much comfort. And as humanity, like we hate the unknown. Even if the known is really bad, we prefer that because it gives us some confidence and we know how to overcome it or deal with it.
I think just the last thing I'll say on that too is like it's good for us in security for the business case justification because now you can say like, look, like we're not just saying, oh God, the sky is falling and like all these bad things can happen. It's like, look, like here is what's happening. This has happened to XYZ organization, things like that. So we can actually have a rational, grounded conversation about what's actually happened.
And it's in the real life media as well, right? Like normally security incidents, particularly like you get the huge scale ones, like the Targets of the world, that makes it onto CNN. But most of the time it doesn't. CEOs don't hear about it. CFOs don't hear about it. So you have to say, hey, read this article. Now, when you log on to CNN, Fox News, whatever, it's like, hey, one of the OpenAI models broke out. Like, and they're like, CEOs will go to their CISO and go the other way around. Like, is this going to happen to us?
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you get to to get budget. That's how you move your program forward.
Chris, I want to switch gears a little bit and I want to talk about this connection between Silicon Valley and DC, because we're seeing that basically America has become, my words, a huge bet on the frontier models, right? And, I'll let that be my words, but it's like this spec. So now that we've got this and there's becoming a tighter and tighter connection between the frontier labs and policymakers, and there's one side of the spectrum who's like, we're out of control, we need regulation, but don't regulate us, but please regulate us. And then the other side, there's a lack of deep untechnical understanding on what good regulation looks like without stifling competition. So there's two angles to this, and it all just seems pretty uninformed, to say the least, right? So I'd love to get kind of your take on where should policy or how should we start thinking about regulating might be too strong of a word, but shaping how we're investing in AI inside the US, whether it comes to like mandating AI bombs and S bombs, or when it comes to gating different model releases. What is your take here? How do we frame this?
Yeah, it's interesting because this one has been unfolding for the last several months, like in getting increasingly like, I don't say tense, but like, it's definitely like we all feel it, it's palpable. And like, I'm not a huge fan of regulation despite coming out of the public sector because I feel like it could be detrimental to us economically and national security wise and like just how we thrive in terms of innovation. But we can't have like unfettered just evals running wild on the internet impacting organizations either. And there's also like a dynamic of, I know this is beyond us in our world in cyber, but like competitive dynamics and regulatory capture that's underway of trying to box out other smaller firms who don't have lobbyist armies and so on, to keep them from catching up to the frontier. But I think like, maybe we do need an evaluation framework for model releases. And I know that's being worked on right now. Like they had a kind of a preview of it to the frontier labs and leading tech companies to come to the White House and I think evaluate like what the framework looks like right now. It's a voluntary framework. So I'm curious to see the details of that. But I do think we need some kind of mechanism, right? And it's tricky because like I've seen this play out. I spent some time at FedRAMP and DoD and so on. Like there's two paths it takes. First is like self-assessment where someone says, oh yeah, we did it, we're good. And like we saw that end up being a massive failure because like as it turns out for the DoD, like no one did it and it wasn't good. And China did steal all the designs for our ships and so on because people weren't doing the things they said they were doing. But it can go the other way where it becomes so cumbersome and costly. Only the biggest, most mature, capital intensive companies can kind of play in that space because, it becomes a moat. Like it pushes out smaller, less financially resourced firms who may have innovative solutions, but they can't bring them to market. So finding that sweet spot is incredibly tough. But I think we need some kind of model, even if it starts off as a voluntary framework that, at least we can have transparency. If we are going to gate a model release or evaluate a model release or slow things down, here's the criteria that's being evaluated and here's how it looked when it was assessed. Even if we don't get the full transparency of that as citizens, we can at least understand there's some process, there's some structure rather than just vibes of, oh, this is bad, scary, block it.
Do you think this will mature beyond the system cards that we're releasing now? So I think like Anthropic and us, when they release the next version, they put out system cards, 200-page PDF. Do you think this becomes like a standardization of that, or this becomes something different?
I think it's going to be much more than that in the sense like, as we talked about before, like the model versus the system and the harness and agents and all those kind of things. Like we're moving beyond just model-centric security. Now it's like the agent, the harness, the kind of the system of systems. So I think it's going to be evaluations. Again, like I said, AISI from the UK is doing that activity and like Meter and other organizations like that. So there's going to be, I think, some level of like, maybe either first party initially and or third party eventually of looking at like it as a system, not just a model, but the harness and like the tool calls and the actions and the activities and like how it behaves under certain contexts. Like, for example, we're super concerned on cybersecurity, but also, bioweapons and things like that. Like, so I think it's going to be more than just the system card for the model per se.
Yeah, so we definitely need to have a shift here because my thinking would be that if we could get towards that, it would also help fundamentally shift what good governance looks like inside the enterprise.
Yeah.
Because right now everyone seems to be scrambling on governance. My hot take was like, for the last 2 years, governance meant visibility. Can I see what I have? Is what you said earlier. If I understand what the MCP servers are, I understand what my skills are, I understand what models are being used, I can demonstrate, good governance. And like that's shifting because now it's like governance is going to collapse into like real-time protection of those agents and saying like, knowing what you have is not good enough. You need to actually be able to enforce some sort of policies around these particular agents and make sure that if you have an agent that has a job, it only talks to the systems it's supposed to talk to and only does the tool calls it's supposed to do so. So I think we're going to see that, but we're also missing is what you're describing there. It's like this framework that takes all these component pieces and says, here's how you weight the collected system.
I think you're spot on. It's like, as you said that, like visibility is great, but it's like the first step. Like I think about like NIST CSF, it's like identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, whatever it is. It's like identify. Okay, like great. Now, like what about all the other things? Like what about detection? What about response? What about recovery? So I think that, we definitely need a more mature approach, but like in the absence of the authorities of the government, the frontier labs and others that are kind of the experts in this space or, the authorities in this space, putting that out, everyone's kind of running around like kind of taking jabs at like what good looks like because no one necessarily knows and everyone has a different opinion and so on.
I can tell you firsthand, like AI governance is probably the hottest hiring space at the minute, but there's no standardization. A lot of companies are like, hey, we need AI governance. I'm like, okay, what do you need? How are you thinking about this? They're like, I told you we need AI governance. I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, thanks.
You can't define the term with the term itself.
Exactly.
We know it when we'll see it.
That is my favorite thing to hear as a recruiter. That's so much fun. But yeah, I think the intentions are good. It is like refreshing to hear that businesses are doing this. But to your point, visibility is one thing. Having frameworks like the guardrails in place, and it's funny, like even thinking about what we were talking about last year and the year before, like there are some things that just become so standardized. No one talks about MCPs at the minute. Like last year, everyone just mentioned like MCP was every other acronym, and these things move so quickly. And I think AI governance that will be standardized soon. It needs to be. And again, like knowing what you're striving towards is super useful. And I think we probably need DC or some regulatory body to give us. I know we have NIST, but like I feel like there could be like a core baseline principle that everyone can attest to.
Yeah, I think just something you said there is worth highlighting is like this space is changing. Like you all have seen this in the last like 24, 36 months. It's like XYZ is going to change everything. And like in like 6 months or even 6 weeks, some cases, it doesn't matter anymore because now the model basically has absorbed it and can do it natively, or like, these things are evolving so quickly. And like there is some risk of us regulating prematurely. And like, the functionality, the capabilities of these things change so quickly that we've created a framework that I agree we need to create a framework, but it must be dynamic and agile and kind of iterative. Otherwise, it's going to become stale and kind of irrelevant very quickly. And it can even have counterintuitive or counterproductive impacts too.
To your point on that, I remember seeing some of the early drafts of legislation, and they literally were talking about the amount of parameters inside of a model. Like it's a large language. It goes, I'm like, what a dumb, brittle piece of legislation when you were trying to say this in a vast changing world, and like 2 billion parameters is one thing and a 3 billion is another parameter. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way you can have, and that's going to hold up 6 months from now,
Yeah, the space
legislation should hold for decades.
This is the challenge, though, of like, because I came from the space where like it is heavily regulated and like, compliance driven and so on. It struggles to keep up with the technology, and like this technology is moving faster than any I've ever experienced in my career. So like it must be iterative, and not only that, but it needs to involve actual expertise. Technical expertise, because often it's written from an ivory tower of like policy type people who don't have deep technical expertise in the domain. And then you're kind of, as a practitioner, you've probably been on the other end of this where you're doing it like, who the hell wrote this? Like, this isn't even how the technology works. So this doesn't make sense. Or actually, we're making things more risky by doing it this way.
The amount of times I've had to walk my auditors through my train of logic to be like, all right, I know this is what the standard says. Here's actually how we have the outcome, and work with me here to get the other side. Yeah.
And policies are not written quickly. These are long processes. These are long, and they take a long time to make a decision on them. If we're in a world where something changes 3, 6, 12 months, but you can't have a weekly update to your policy. So it is tough. And then I think like one thing to mention is overregulation. There are global political factors in play here as well, which is if we overregulate and other powers in the world get faster and further, that's a real problem for the US and our competitive advantage that we maybe have right now, probably have, but for how long?
Yeah, I didn't want to necessarily go this way because I know you're from the UK, but the UK set out to be a regulatory superpower, right? And in their own words. And like that has had economic implications and national security implications and dependencies and so on. So there is like yes, we need to be safe and secure, and we need to regulate and have like frameworks to mitigate risks and hurt citizens' privacy and all these kind of things. But we can't like, what did it say? Cut your nose, spite your face, or something like that.
Very British saying for what it's worth.
But we can't like shoot ourselves in the foot to where like we hurt our own economic prosperity and our national security as like this technology becomes critical infrastructure and it's embedded into weaponry and all kinds of future activities. Like, we have to go out smartly on this too.
Yeah, and like Conor says, as an economy, we've taken a big bet on this. And I think one thing that we talked about this in other episodes, but like the whole industry has a PR challenge, which is if this performs, it's good for the country as a whole. I don't think many voters necessarily think that right now. And I think as we go into the next wave of elections in a couple of years, obviously with the midterms now, but in a couple of years, I feel like this is going to be a political chess piece. And people are going to use this chip to gain votes and, again, cutting off our nose to spite our face in the long run.
No, this is a massive, again, like beyond cyber, but this is a societal thing. And like, I can't quantitatively prove this, but you can feel it in the air. Like people are not necessarily in our world. Sure, they're excited about AI, but in the broader society, most people I talk to, like family, friends, etc., like they're not necessarily excited about data centers and AI and automation of jobs. And the way we speak about it from the frontier labs, like they didn't do themselves any favors for a while there, and they've shifted their language because they realized like they're going to impede their own economic ambitions. But it took a while for them to like realize, oh wait, we're like doing ourselves more harm than good here.
So I'll give you an anecdote that proves your thesis there. I was at the grocery store 3 weeks ago, and I'm walking down. This guy's got this T-shirt, and it says AI free. And I'm thinking like, why is he handing out like free AI? I don't get it. And I'm like, oh, this guy's like really like, I want nothing to do with AI. I'm like an organic human. And you're seeing these terms. You're like, okay, yes, there is a part of America that has T-shirts that says I am free with no AI in my life.
On the flip side, I am shook that you don't have your agent do your grocery shopping. So there's like both ends of the spectrum.
No, I think it's there are some people who want nothing to do with it, and it's like any other technology. Like it can be social media is a good example. It could be an incredible thing that bring people together, and you learn so much and you have great conversations, or it could be like this thing that sucks up so much of your life and makes you dumber, or whatever.
I agree.
Amplifies the worst aspects of our society. And like AI could be that. So it's like how we use it is going to define how beneficial it is for us as a society.
So one of the things you said there is like these technologies can be for our good or they can be for our peril, and it's all about the quality of governance that we put on top of it. And it's the quality, it's not the volume, it's the quality of governance we put on top of it. So with that though, I did want to wrap us there because I think we got a chance to cover a lot of key aspects. And I would say for anyone who's listening today who wants to dive deeper into your work, they definitely should be following your work on Resilient Cyber. Your Substack is pretty amazing. And then of course, following you on LinkedIn as well. So
awesome.
Chris, thanks for coming on the pod, man.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
If today's conversation gave you something useful, a framework, a question worth sitting with, a way to position something you're already dealing with, that's the point. Connect with Conor and I on LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes. Tell us what landed.
And if you know another security leader who's navigating the same pressure, text them this episode. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.